Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, Sherman Read. Today I'll be doing my June wrap-up. So before I dive into each book, let's just go over the stats a little bit. So June was actually a really good month for me. I read 15 books, and honestly I am actually really proud of one, the number, and two, the quality, because I had no books that were under 3 stars. So out of the 15 books that I read, 4 of them were 3-star reads, 1 of them was 3.5 stars, 4 of them were 4 stars, 1 of them was 4.5 stars, and 5 of them were 5-star reads. So overall I am actually really pleased, like I said already, of just how good the reading month was for me. I definitely didn't expect it. I felt like there were some points there were definitely at some points where I felt like I had like a reading slump of a sort, but I ended up doing a 24 or like a 48-hour readathon, which I did a vlog on it, so I'll link that somewhere above and down below in case you want to check that out. But I felt like that helped boost my enthusiasm for reading and just got me more into the reading mood, so that definitely helped a lot. I want to do more of that in the future. But yeah, let's just kind of go into the books that I read for the month of June. The first book that I want to discuss is House of Dragons by Jessica Cluess. This one I gave 4 stars. So when the emperor dies in this book, the 5 royal houses have to come together and compete for the dragon throne. And usually it's the firstborn who is called to this along with their dragon. However, this year something weird is happening, because instead of the 5 firstborns that were called to compete, instead there were 5 outcasts. And so suddenly they're thrown into this competition where they are forced to compete or they will die. I actually really enjoy this book. I love the dragons. They were such prominent figures. I feel like a lot of times the dragon books that I read are either used as just like a plot device where they're just there kind of, or just to like, you know, improve on like the world itself. But in this book, they actually played a very prominent roles. They were always there along with their riders, who were the competitors, and so they were always there. Like, they were flying with them, they were doing some of the trials with them, etc. And I really just like having them as a very, like, a bigger figure or play a bigger part in this book. As for the characters, I actually really enjoy reading about them as well. I love their banter, I love their squabbles between each other, and sometimes even though I found them to be a little bit annoying at times, and they all had their issues and problems, but overall I actually really enjoyed reading about all 5 of them. And the ending was such a huge cliffhanger that I really want to read the sequel. So I am aware that the author is quite problematic. Something happened with her back in like end of 2020, all over Twitter, etc. And I understand that she was problematic, but I still enjoyed this book. Like, I felt like I really liked the fantasy elements to it. Like I said, like the dragons, even the characters were good. There were just a lot of things about this book that I really enjoyed, and I really want to continue on with the series. But I'm not entirely sure if or when the sequel will come out. I've heard like mixed things. I know like the publisher had dropped her at some point, etc. So I don't even know if that's happening. But if there is, I really do hope to pick up the sequel, because the ending definitely leaves much to be desired. I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions into the future of this dragon empire. So yeah, definitely enjoy this first book. The next book that I picked up is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. Hopefully I pronounced his last name correctly. This book I gave 3 stars. So this book basically follows a woman, her name is Alicia, where her life was seemingly perfect until one day an incident happens and the police shows up to find out that her husband has been shot 5 times in the face, and it was done by Alicia herself. And since then she never spoke again. Years later, we now follow a character called Theo, who is a criminal psychotherapist, and for some reason he decides to take it upon himself to get her to start talking again, find out why exactly she murdered her husband, etc. This book was honestly a little bit disappointing. I did give it 3 stars, so I still enjoyed it, but I felt like from all the hype that I received, I expected more from it. However, the plot was more like, I was expecting more of a plot where it was going into like her mind, trying to figure out like why it happened. But it kind of went more of like a murder mystery route, which kind of makes sense obviously, because they're trying to find like why exactly she murdered her husband. But at the same time, it's like, you already know that she murdered her husband, right? Like, that's kind of given from the premise of the book. So I was hoping more of like an analysis of her like psyche. That was not really the case with this book at all. Like I said, it's mostly like a murder mystery, a kind of like, in a way it was kind of like questioning, did she really murder her husband? And I'm like, but it's already like that's already done, you know. Like, I was definitely expecting like a different route to this book. And while there was still a lot of plot twists and turns I didn't expect, I felt like the ultimate one, aka the climax, was one that I actually saw coming. And that was just so unfortunate, because I was really hoping that I'd be wrong. Like, I always, okay, so part of me is always like, I would love to find out, you know, like guess what the author's trying to do here, and part of me is like excited to like be right. Other part of me is like not happy because I'm like, damn, like I was really hoping the author would just like throw a curveball here, and I just like am still shocked and like surprised. So it's one of those like love-hate relationship with me with like trying to find out like what the plot twist is. In this case though, I definitely felt like more disappointed because I was really hoping that the author would do something incredible, something like out there, and that wasn't the case. I kind of suspected it like a few chapters prior to it was being revealed. I was like, how funny would it be if this happened? And that happened. So yeah, like I was a little disappointed by that overall. Then the next book that I picked up is I'll Be the One by Lila Lee. This book I gave 3 stars. This book follows a girl called Sky who has wanted to dance her entire life and become a K-pop idol. So she decides to enter a K-pop competition / show called You're My Shining Star, where she enters as a dancer as well as a singer. And she ends up making the show, despite everyone, including her own mother, advising her against it because of her body shape. And so the rest of the book just kind of follows her as she navigates the show, going through all the different rounds, having people eliminated, etc., and hoping she's not one of them. And that's kind of what this book is about. This book was really freaking adorable. There were just so many characters in this book that were just so cute. Like I was just like, damn, like I wish I know people like that. Like they were just like really fluffy, heartwarming characters that honestly like you wouldn't expect based on like the first impression that you got from them. Like I believe the author literally described them as like they're so beautiful and they're kind of like standoffish, coldish, but in reality they were like not. They're like warm, bubbly, and I was like, that is literally the definition of a resting bitch face. So anyways, another element that I really enjoyed about this book was just how much this book discussed fat phobia in K-pop industry, as well as what it was like being queer while also being Asian. Like these are 2 topics that are usually taboo in not just K-pop industry or any Korean industry. It's just Asian like environment overall. Like everyone just doesn't really want to talk about those 2 things. Like they're very it's hard if you are fat and if you are queer. It's even harder if you are both. So I felt super seen in this book and with the character, because a lot of her struggles as an Asian person with, you know, like weight issues as well as being queer, like I definitely understood where she was coming from. Not with the queer element because I'm straight, but like with the weight issue, like for sure, like 100%, like I completely relate to her as well. But the best part about this book was obviously Sky herself. She was just so inspiring as well as fearless. Like there are just so many things that, you know, like when she was confronted, when she faced a lot of obstacles purely because of her weight, the fact that, you know, she was like, you know what, I'm going to stand up for myself, and she did that, and she like clapped back essentially. I was like, damn girl, like I just like, she had a lot of great quotes in this book for sure. Okay, then the next books that I read was actually Demon Slayers, volume 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I actually read the entire series during my 24 to 48 hour readathon vlog. So I'll link that again somewhere above and down below in case you want to check that out. But these are the 5 books that I gave 5 stars because they were so good. It basically follows a guy called Tanjiro who, you know, goes to the village one day to run some errands, comes back the next morning because it was too late for him to come back the night of. And so he comes back, you know, a day later, and he finds out that his entire family has been slaughtered by demons. And in fact, one of his younger sisters had somehow become a demon herself. So he ends up going on a journey to find out if there's a way to reverse this, to get his sister back as a human instead of a demon, while also training to become a demon slayer. This book, like I mentioned, was just so good. Like all the books in the series so far, I'm still very much in the whole like anime part of this book or the series, because everything that's happening in what I've read so far was exactly in the anime. So I am excited to continue reading the manga as soon as possible so I can kind of like figure out like what happens more along the anime, because everyone knows anime takes so much longer to come out. So I'm really hoping it's season 2, but I don't think it's gonna be until like another year or so. So very unfortunate, but at least the manga series is done, so I can at least read that and then kind of find out what happens and then just watch the anime when it comes out later. Next book that I picked up is The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. This is the book that I have read during my 24/48 hour readathon. So again, I will link it somewhere for you guys to check it out, but this book I gave 3.5 stars. So this is basically a short story collection where it features multiple short stories from various countries in the Grishaverse, and some of them were considered retellings retellings or inspired by classic fairy tales. Honestly, for this book, there are definitely a few that I enjoyed, some of them I didn't. I think I had like 3 favorites or like 2 favorites, and then 2 that I like really didn't care much for, and then there were other 2 that were just like middle of the road for me. But I did find all of them to be quite intriguing, especially the ones that were in kingdoms that were not commonly mentioned. But yeah, overall I still enjoyed it. It definitely gave me more insight on some of the neighboring countries besides, you know, Kerch, Ravkin, etc. Then this next book that I picked up is Head Over Heels by Hannah Orenstein. This book I gave 4 stars. So it has been 7 years since Avery has injured herself in the Olympic trials and missed her shot at the Olympic gold. And since then, things have been different. She recently broke up with her ex and she ends up moving back to her hometown to live with her parents, feeling pretty low for where she is currently in her life, whereas what she could have been if she had not injured herself in the Olympic trials. And she ends up accepting a part-time coaching job where she ends up coaching a young gymnast called Haley, who is Olympic potential, alongside with Ryan, one of her many like gymnast colleagues in the past, as a coach. And then the rest of the book kind of goes into the competitive world of the Olympic gymnastics, mental health, as well as sexual assault. So before I get into it, trigger warnings, there is a lot of mental health discussions in this book, such as depression, and there's also sexual assault. So for my thoughts, I actually really enjoyed this book. I do wish that the romance was a bit more fleshed out. I felt like there were just some times when it was a little bit choppy, but at the same time, like, that is actually kind of common and like, or it's more like a realistic portrayal of reality. I mean, romance is never really like smooth sailing, you know what I mean? So even though I do wish that there was a bit more of a romance, at the same time it was actually more of a realistic portrayal of how this romance went. I also really enjoyed reading about the coach and gymnast relationships, especially between Avery and Haley, and just seeing how much Avery cared about Haley's like mental health, because it's very stressful as a young teenager in such a competitive world. And so because of this, I do think that the mental health issues and the discussions that were in this book was actually really important, because I feel like as a viewer myself, sometimes I don't really notice, or like that's not something I think about, as to like just the tremendous pressure and stress and expectations that these girls are facing from everyone and from themselves. I mean, these girls are like 14 or 15 years old. They're literally like almost like half my age if you think about it. So it's like just crazy. Like when I was that age, like the fact that they're going through like so much more than I ever could have when I was that age is just like insane. So I just felt like discussing like the mental health issues around it and just like, the strain was something that was like actually really important. So I actually really enjoyed this book. And like I said already, there was some mentions of sexual assault in here that is just really sad to hear, to be honest. I was not really expecting that element in this book at all. So when it came up, I was kind of like, wow, like I am shook by just what was going on with some of these gymnasts. But yeah, no more discussions about this because, you know, spoilers. But yeah, definitely go into, like I said already, trigger warnings for those 2 for sure. The next book that I picked up is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This one I gave 4.5 stars. 7 years ago, this ship went out to make a mockumentary of mermaids in the ocean. Obviously, it was a mockumentary because they didn't expect mermaids to be real. However, they ended up finding them, and the entire ship, everyone on the ship, died. But the thing is, even though they have footage of what had happened, not everyone in the world actually believes it. They believe that there were some CG effects, etc. So now the company that has sent them on the first voyage wants to go to another voyage just so they can find out what truly happened and to prove everyone that the mermaids were actually real. This book was the perfect blend of horror and science, and I really enjoy the portrayal of mermaids in this book. They were just not at all what I expected, but finding about them, learning about like what they look like, and just kind of seeing like what they were doing is just like super fascinating. And I felt like the author did an incredible job with keeping up with the suspense and the creepy element while also learning a lot, like providing a lot of information about marine biology and just like science in general. The one thing I would say about this book is that if you don't like very like nitty-gritty sciencey things, then you might not really enjoy this book, because this book kind of goes pretty deep into the science element, just talking about like all the various like components of marine biology and how there are just so many different like aspects to it. It's just not like a marine biologist. There is like different scientists for everything. So, like, there's a scientist who, like, you know, deals with like sound waves in the ocean. There's another one who deals with like radar, like, you know, signals and stuff like that, and they all go into the nitty-gritty details for them. So if you don't really like very sciencey books, then this probably isn't for you, but I actually really enjoyed it. I also recommend it reading it physically, because I tried listening to an audiobook and it did not work out. I actually ended up wanting to DNF it. Then I was like, wait, you know what, let me just like hold on, because I've only like listened to it for like 30 minutes. Let me just like take the physical book and just start reading from there, and it was just so much more enjoyable that way. Then the next book I picked up is Date Me, Bryson Keller by Kevin Wen Wai. This one I gave 4 stars. This book basically follows a guy called Bryson who is on a dare where every week the first person who asks him out on Monday he must say yes to and date for the rest of the week. However, things change when Kai decides to ask him out instead, and so what started off as a joke and a dare turns out to be something more. This was so freaking adorable. I really enjoy the serious discussions about homophobia and racism in this book. Also, I do want to mention a trigger warning for homophobia, because there was one scene that it became quite violent. And then another thing I really enjoyed was just how supportive Kai's friends were. It was just like, this whole book was just so cute, guys. Like, from the characters, the romance itself, to like all the banters between all the characters. It was just like so freaking adorable. I definitely recommend it if you're looking for like a really cute queer book, because this is definitely it. Then the next book that I picked up is Year of the Witching, which I gave 3 stars. So this book follows a girl called Emmanuel, where she kind of belongs to a cult where religion and being good is basically everything. However, one day she ends up in the dark woods because of an error, like a mistake that happened, and she somehow accidentally unleashes a series of plagues that were designed by witches. So she tries to undo what she accidentally unleashed, and in doing so she finds out a lot more about the prophet, the guy who is running everything in this cult, as well as the father, aka God, I suppose, in this cult. This book, I had such high expectations. Everyone was raving about it when it first came out. They were like, this is horror, but more like, you know, like just creepy horror, and I don't know about that. This book was also incredibly slow, and there was also this romance in here which I really didn't expect at all. I mean, I don't know why I didn't think there'd be romance. I just thought it'd be more like a horror book, so there probably wouldn't be a romance in here, but there definitely was, and it was very insta-lovey. I did not like it at all. However, the one thing that I did really enjoy in this book was actually the feminist messages, and I was also very curious about the plagues and the witches that were portrayed in this book, which is all very interesting for me. Definitely different than what I expected, but like I said already, I just had such high expectations going into it, and this book did not deliver. The next book that I picked up is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This one I gave 3 stars. This book is inspired by Romeo and Juliet, but it's set in Shanghai in the 1920s, featuring 2 rival gangs. There is a lot of talk about monsters in the waters and killing people off. There's also a lot of historical elements in this book, such as the communists versus the nationalists, as well as colonialism during that time period. I actually really enjoyed the historical elements in this book, because it was just so refreshing to see something so different in YA literature. I mean, we don't really have a lot of YA literature set in Shanghai during the 1920s, where it just features so many other, you know, issues during that time period. I actually don't know any books that's set in during that time period, to be honest, in China really. So I found that to be like a very refreshing take on what I normally don't see. I also really enjoy reading about the mystery in terms of like what exactly were these monsters, who's behind everything, and just like finding everything out. However, my biggest problem with this book was actually the characters. They just felt so dry and boring, and so I was just never invested with any of them or their romance for that matter. And while I usually enjoy like childhood best friends to lovers trope, I felt like the way how this book was done was just very dry, like I said already, and it could have been so angsty because of the whole like 2 rivals family, but that was not really the case at all. So this is definitely a book where it's very much a plot driven book versus a character driven book. I am definitely more of a character driven reader, so books like these is why like I end up not liking so much, because I, like I said, am definitely more of a character driven reader versus a plot driven, and this was definitely not the case. The last and final book that I want to discuss today is Mexican Gothic, which I gave 3 stars. I did talk about this a little bit more in my horror Goodreads reading vlog, so again I'll link that somewhere above and down below in case you want to check that out. But this book follows a woman called Naomi who ends up going to a secluded town after receiving a distressing letter from her cousin about ghosts and things in the walls. And she goes there and finds this house to be so cold and uninviting, especially with her cousin's new husband. This is another one where I just had high expectations, but I think the execution was not done well because I was not very pleased. Like, I was very disappointed overall. It was just a really odd book now that I think about it. But the best part about this book was actually the writing style. It was so lyrical and beautiful. I mean, I love like all her books I've read so far. I've really enjoyed her writing style, but there's just something about the plot that just never really like fulfills my expectations, never really delivers. So that's like my biggest issue with this author, I suppose. And this is another book where it was definitely more plot driven, because while I was interested in like the mystery and finding out what was behind everything and what was going on, I didn't really connect with any of the characters, nor did I care with any of them. And since I am, like I said already, a character driven person, this book didn't really do it for me. So anyway, that's to say for this video. Like I said already, great month overall. There were a few disappointing reads, but they weren't disappointing to the point that it was like a 1 or 2 star reads. I still enjoyed elements to it, so I still enjoyed it overall. Just, you know, I was expecting like higher ratings or like a better experience, I suppose. But that's to say for this video. Let me know down below which books have you read for the month of June. Have you read any of these books that I mentioned this time around? As always, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. It really does help my channel. And if you'd like to see more content of me, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. As always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!